All right, we're recording and I'm admitting 12 people in. You're going to tell them it's going to be another minute or two.
All right. Hello, everyone, and we're going to give it another minute or two to let the other participants join in, and we will be back in about a minute. All right, is there any other people in the waiting room that we can let in? It's 1:01, and I want to make sure that we are being good stewards of your time. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and begin this presentation. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zoom meeting, which is Stabilizing Housing in an Unstable World. What recent moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures mean for the Lowcountry residents. So with that, let's jump right in so we have as much time as possible at the end to get all of your questions answered. I'd like to begin with just a quick overview of some Zoom housekeeping points. All participants are muted and will be muted for the duration of this presentation. The video feature has been disabled. Please keep everything cordial, including the comments. We are here to help get some of your questions answered, so please be nice to us. Those that post inappropriate comments will be removed from this meeting and will not be allowed to return. So please make sure to keep everything cordial. There will be some polling questions asked. Please know that the responses are anonymous and the answers are just going to help us customize the presentation for this audience. There is time allotted to ask the panelists general questions. During these times, you could type in questions you would like answered by clicking on the chat button that is right here and typing in your questions and hitting enter. A link to this meeting's recordings and FAQs created from the questions we are unable to answer today will be posted on United Way's website, which is uwlowcountry.org. And a complete copy of this presentation, along with all the links that are contained within, will also be posted. So don't feel the need to scribble furiously, jotting down notes and links. It's all going to be posted to our website and easily accessible. So. All right, so now that we have the housekeeping stuff out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce you all to our panel. The first panelist we have is Ann Caywood. She is an executive attorney for Lowcountry Legal Volunteers, and you'll find her contact information off to the right-hand side. She has been a Lowcountry resident since 2011, serving as the executive attorney for Lowcountry Legal Volunteers since 2015, and prior to that, practiced locally in North Carolina and has been practicing since 2001 as a litigator. Lowcountry Legal Volunteers normally has 2 full-time attorneys and at least 15 retired attorneys, bringing hundreds of years of combined legal experience to serve the Lowcountry and their legal needs. Last year, Lowcountry Legal Volunteers provided the equivalent of over $2 million in legal services to the community. Great job, Ann. And Ann lives in the Lowcountry with her husband, son, and dog, Lila. Ann, can you wave to the group?
Hey there.
All right, so next there's Angela Childers. She's the executive director of the Beaufort Housing Authority. Angela began her career with the Housing Authority in 1998 and obtained her current position as the executive director in 2012. She has served on numerous local, state, and regional boards and professional associations, and we've listed them. They are too numerous to go over. And she is president of the South Carolina Association of Housing Authority Executive Directors and a member of the COSY Board, which is Collaborative Organization for Services for Youth. She's also a strong advocate for affordable housing, children and families, believing that every community is responsible for its elderly, disabled, and children. And Angela, can you give a wave?
Hello, everyone.
All right, and next we have Amber Hewitt. She is Manager of Community Impact here at the United Way of the Lowcountry. She was born and raised in, I'm going to butcher this, Columbiana County, Ohio, and moved to Florida and eventually found her way to the Lowcountry here at Beaufort about 14 years ago. She began working at United Way of the Lowcountry 2 years ago and is now the Manager of Community Impact. And prior to that, she worked for 16 years at the Salvation Army. So if you see her and remember her, that's probably where you remember her if it's not under United Way. And she was the Director of Operations as well as the Director of Social Services over there. Aside from her work at United Way, she is volunteering all over the place in our community. And most recently, she helped to achieve a Guinness World Record for the most pink flamingos in a line at Fripp Island's Pledge the Pink breast cancer awareness event. And she loved that event. And she also provides a whole lot of volunteer opportunity with the giving to provide Thanksgiving meals for those in need. Amber is a wife, mother, and nana to her 2 young grandchildren, and she is very passionate about helping others and taking photographs of the Lowcountry. You want to give a wave, Amber? All right, and last there's me. I am Vice President here at United Way of the Lowcountry for Community Impact. I've lived in the Lowcountry for 19 years now, and before that I lived up north and was a criminologist for the Baltimore City Police Department. I've been with the United Way of the Lowcountry for 17 years now, and my responsibilities include overseeing the grants process that provides operational funding to local nonprofits, some of which are registered for this seminar, and the administration of United Way's 2-county helpline, which links local residents up with the resources that can assist. I sit on several local boards and have served as a presenter for numerous trainings that focus on needs of nonprofit organizations, as well as breaking the cycle of poverty. I'm a nationally certified information and referral specialist by the Alliance of Information and Referral Systems. I'm a certified trainer for the Bridges Out of Poverty Matrix and a very proud Leadership Beaufort alumni. All right. Now that I've introduced our panel, let's get to the real reason why all of us are here today, which is really to discuss landlord-tenant laws in South Carolina, find out what the legal process for evictions and foreclosures is, determine how do you know if you're eligible for protection under the moratorium, get the FAQs asked and answered, and to share who you can go to for help for those that are in need. But before we kind of go into the presentation, let's ask a polling question. We're going to give you a few seconds to respond. Okay, so what do you hope to take away from this presentation? We are getting a whole lot of responses right now. We're going to leave it open for maybe another couple of seconds. All right, so it looks like 17% said resources, 8% said tenant rights. We have 0% right now for landlord rights, and 92% said all of the above. Okay. All right. With that, I am going to hand the floor to Anne, and she is going to talk about the laws in reference to landlord-tenant laws and also the moratorium. Anne, take it away.
Thank you, Chrystie. And full disclosure, I put all of the above, and I think that's what all the presenters are trying to give to you today. All of the above, that information. So we'll dive right into landlord-tenant law in South Carolina. All of this stuff is really easily available to everyone out there under the SC Bar website, as well as the statutes. So all of this is covered and easily accessible in the statutes, but we'll go over it and go over those basics today. So the South Carolina Residential Landlord Tenant Act applies to rental agreements for a personal residence or home. So a majority of these landlord-tenant disputes have to do with the non-payment of rent, which is really one of the reasons why we're here today speaking with you guys to share more about rights and remedies for tenants and for landlords. So that's the big area of dispute and legal actions. So the failure by a landlord or tenant to comply with the agreement that they've signed or verbally agreed to gives that landlord or tenant the right to file a claim, and that claim needs to be filed within the magistrate's court. We'll move on to our next slide. And the beauty of the Landlord-Tenant Act is it's really, really clear. It sets forth the obligations of both parties, both the landlord and the tenant, otherwise known as the renter, in reference to deposits, maintenance, many, many essential services provided to the tenant, and some other details. So if it's not covered specifically in the lease, you can always turn to that statute to find out more of what your rights are exactly. So a landlord or a renter / tenant may be able to recover money damages, and in a lot of instances can recover the attorney's fees if there's a violation of that rental agreement or the statutes itself. And after the lease has been terminated or ended, if that renter refuses to move out, then the landlord can seek what is called an order of eviction in magistrate's court. The tenant's entitled to notice of the proceedings, and then the magistrate will issue that order of eviction, asking the tenant to move out immediately or explain within 10 days after service of that order why they should not be evicted. So it's really, really important if you're a tenant, if you're in that renter position and you get served with that by the sheriff, that you request a hearing within those 10 days. And say you do that and you think you may be covered under the moratorium that we'll discuss in greater detail, you still need to request a hearing to protect your rights. Say, for example, the landlord unlawfully removes or stops that tenant from occupying the dwelling unit, or, for example, causes, interruption of services like water, heat, things of that nature, then that person, that renter, has that right to go to the magistrate's court and require that the landlord either give them access to their residence or, restore the heat, the water, things of those nature. Otherwise, there's some great risk to that landlord that does not do the right thing, and that renter could possibly recover an amount equal to 3 months rent, twice their actual damages that they were suffered, and attorney's fees. So, that's a great protection for renters under the law. Also, say, for example, the landlord comes in and makes an unlawful entry or harasses that renter, they can seek an order against the landlord, also in magistrate's court or circuit court, to stop that conduct from continuing. They have several options. They can, one, terminate that rental agreement. In either case, they may be able to recover their actual damages plus attorney's fees. Say, for example, the tenant gets notice of an ejectment or eviction, then the renter is actually entitled to a trial by jury. Of course, you have to request it. And this is, again, another time where I'm going to tell you many times to seek an attorney's help. There's so many options, and we'll go over those resources for people in South Carolina to get legal help when they're facing these type of circumstances. So typically that order of ejectment is going to be served by the deputy sheriff, and that deputy sheriff carries that out, presents a copy to the tenant, and that person can at that point vacate voluntarily, or there are some other remedies that can take place to eject that tenant from the premises. So generally, there are about 5 reasons why a landlord can evict a tenant. And the first, of course, is the big one, non-payment of rent. If rent's not paid when due, the landlord may end the rental agreement and start those eviction proceedings that we just discussed. The landlord does not have to give this written notice necessarily if the rental agreement or lease is in writing and says it's clearly that no written notice will be given, but typically written notice should be given, and that's the appropriate thing to do so everybody knows what's going on in that circumstance. Breach of the terms of the rental agreement, and that can be either verbal or written, these agreements. So if the renter tenant fails to live up to the terms of the rental agreement, such as the requirement to pay rent, landlord can terminate that agreement and begin those eviction proceedings. There are other things that a tenant could do that, not abiding by other terms of the rental agreement. Then the landlord at that point has that option. If the tenant doesn't remedy that issue or live by those terms of the rental agreement 14 days after receiving that written notice, then that eviction process can begin. Failure of a tenant is the third reason to maintain that dwelling unit in a healthy and safe manner. So basically, it's common sense that the tenant would maintain their home safe, make sure it's maintained, make sure it's not overridden with bugs or things of that nature. Notify that landlord if there are certain repairs that the landlord is responsible and needs to make. Keep things clean and sanitary in that unit or apartment or home that they are renting. So there's some requirements on the renter to do those things. If it's not an emergency, then the tenant has to remedy any wrongdoing within 14 days. Otherwise, the landlord can end that rental agreement and start eviction process. And the fourth is abandonment of the rental unit by the tenant. So the tenant leaves the rental unit and, the landlord may well, in certain circumstances, take possession of that rental unit. And there is some issues, if there is valuable items within that unit that have been left, there may not be a right to possession of that landlord. It just depends on the monetary value of what may be left in that apartment unit or home by the renter. And of course, the most natural thing would be when the lease term has actually expired, ended per the term of the rental agreement. And if the renter refused to move out, then that landlord can bring an action to seek to evict the tenant. Okay. And so just briefly to discuss the moratorium and be very clear that a renter or tenant still has the obligation to pay the rent. Ultimately, there's no stopping that the rent at some point will ultimately be due. But what the moratorium helps with is the ultimate impending eviction. So the eviction protections are there through December 31st of 2020. But the rent will still remain due. So we don't want anyone out there to think that that rent will just go away. It will still ultimately at the end of the day be due at a certain point. And so naturally, under normal basic circumstances, after that rental agreement is terminated, for any of the reasons we already discussed, the landlord has a right to their property, get back into the rental unit, and things of those natures. And the landlord at that point, if there's some damage to the rental unit, they may seek damages and can possibly get reasonable attorney's fees as well. And just touching on the CDC's temporary eviction moratorium, that is an extension of protections for renters. And to qualify for the protection, you'll need to meet certain eligibility requirements. And United Way, and of course, Lowcountry Legal Volunteers will put a link to that specific declaration that must be filled out and filed. We'll put that link on the websites. And that's very specific. You have to meet certain income requirements. have made efforts to pay rent, and a number of other requirements that'll be discussed later. And this order is effective as of September 4th. We briefly talked about that declaration, sworn testimony. Each adult listed on the lease has to sign that. So say, husband and wife are both listed on that lease. They would both need to complete their own separate declaration. And you're still required, as I said, to pay rent, follow all the other guidelines of where you live, and not violate those terms. And the landlord could still, in fact, evict based on other reasons. And I think we'll answer some of those questions later as well. And let's talk about foreclosure. A lot of folks, are facing foreclosure right now. It's a tough time in our communities, and we want to address that as well. The good news is those extensions have been extended for FHA backed mortgages. So there are some protections out there for folks with mortgages, and that's affected also through the end of the year. So that is helping folks not be foreclosed upon based on certain guidelines if they have certain types of mortgages. And say, for example, just generally, we'll discuss those mortgagee foreclosure laws. If you're going through a tough time, be it now or later in the future, and you're having trouble making your mortgage payments, you might go through what's called the foreclosure process in South Carolina. And services and lenders, they can make mistakes. They're human too, and violate the law when processing these foreclosures. And there are consumer protections for folks that are trying to pay their mortgage, trying to do the right things. And if there is some kind of mistake, you may have a valid defense to that foreclosure. So that's very important that you immediately seek some legal advice. And again, we're going to give you some great resources so you can get some legal advice with that. So federal mortgage servicing laws give various protections to homeowners both before and during the foreclosure process. So there's certain notice requirements on behalf of that servicer who's servicing that foreclosure, if you would call it that, for the lender. They've got to contact you as the homeowner to discuss the situation 36 days after that missed mortgage payment. And then if there are subsequent missed mortgage payments, they need to contact you as well within 36 days. So no later than 45 days after a missed mortgage payment, that servicer has to inform the homeowner about loss mitigation opportunities, foreclosure alternatives that are and might be available. And generally, there's about 120 days legally before that lender can start the process to foreclose on a delinquent payment situation. The foreclosures in South Carolina are through the courts. The courts handle this process. That lender has to file a proper lawsuit to foreclose on someone's home. So if you are served with paperwork, any kind of legal paper, like let's just say any kind of legal paperwork, you're going to want to reach out for legal advice and assistance immediately, because there are tight timeframes in which you have to respond to defend your rights. In South Carolina, the foreclosure process actually goes through a court of equity, and a master in equity is the one that handles that judicially, typically. Okay. And here's what to expect if you're one of those folks that at this point are having a tough time and not able to make mortgage payments. You're going to get notice. Usually a breach letter is required, and not in South Carolina in particular, but most mortgages, and you can look at your loan documents or look those up online because they're with the Register of Deeds, to see if that is required. A breach letter typically would be by most major lenders. And again, the complaint and service and summons, it's going to be about 120 days after the delinquency date before something can be filed. And then after that is filed, that will have to be served on the homeowner. And again, the summons tells the homeowner at that point where that case is filed, who to get a hold of, who the lender's attorney is, and that a response must be filed within 30 days after the complaint and summons are served. And so anytime, again, when you get a legal document and it's served upon you, definitely get some help, get some immediate legal help because those timeframes are very tight and it can negatively affect the outcome of your case. Foreclosure intervention. To ensure that homeowners get that opportunity to discuss and negotiate potential alternatives to foreclosure, the South Carolina Supreme Court issued an administrative order requiring that lenders serve homeowners with notice of the right to foreclosure intervention. The homeowner has 30 days from service of this notice of request for foreclosure intervention. Otherwise, the case may proceed. So, you know, that's a tight time frame as well to request that right to foreclosure intervention. So some of the alternatives would be loan modification and other potential workouts to avoid foreclosure. So, you know, there's always some type of resolution that can be had, hopefully short of foreclosure for people. And again, you know, you would want to have some legal protections and some legal advice on how best to do that. So say, for example, the homeowner files that answer, does so in a timely manner, then they will be entitled to a foreclosure hearing. So they will essentially get their day in court. But if that homeowner doesn't file an answer, then they will most likely, the lender will get that judgment and proceed forward with the foreclosure. And before the sale, the homeowner actually has the right to pay off the entire debt and stop the sale from happening. And that's called the right of redemption. And that, you know, of course, that's quite a tall order, but it is a right that is important to know about. After that foreclosure judgment, a public auction of the home scheduled. Notice must be placed in public, 3 places in the county, public places, and in the local newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks, and that the auction will be conducted. The proceeds of the sale are applied to the homeowner's mortgage debt. If the proceeds exceed that total amount owed, the homeowner is entitled to excess, which generally there probably would not be an excess. And that's assuming there are other types of debts or liens on that property. But if the proceeds fail to completely satisfy that amount owed to the lender, then that lender could seek a deficiency judgment against the homeowner. And if the lender reserves the right to seek a deficiency judgment, bidding on the property has to stay open an additional 30 days. And some lenders just waive this requirement because they don't want to delay that ultimate foreclosure process and judgment. Again, just to reiterate, talk to an attorney if you're facing a foreclosure in South Carolina. Definitely speak to an attorney. You can certainly have access and read the foreclosure laws for yourself, but I would definitely recommend that you speak to an attorney for assistance.
All right, so thanks so much, Anne. I don't know if the other participants are like me, but that was a great explanation of the laws. And when I start hearing legalese, I start hearing Charlie Brown's teacher, that womp, 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 womp. So thank you so much for that. And now we're going to ask another polling question. So the question right now is, are you a tenant or a landlord? We're just trying to get a feel for who is attending this webinar, or Zoom meeting rather. So I'm looking over here and 52% of the group has voted. Oh, we're up to 63. It looks like there are more tenants than landlords, but we have a good bit of the folks that are neither landlords or tenants. They're just here for information, which is also wonderful. So all right, with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the frequently asked questions. And now that we know a little more about the overall eviction and foreclosure process and the law, I'm going to hand the floor to Angela Childers, Executive Director of the Beaufort Housing Authority, to go over some frequently asked questions. So many of the questions that you might have are going to be answered in this section. If not, don't fret. You will have an opportunity to ask specific questions at the end of this presentation. So without further ado, Angela, take it away.
I think she's muted.
Nope, I'm unmuted. I was now I'm unmuted. Okay, I'll start again. Thank you, Chrystie and Anne. And Anne, I'm very glad that that presentation will be made available online, because there's a lot of good information there and the links are very important. So let's get started. As we go through the screens, I'm not going to read the answers word for word. You can do that later, but I am going to provide you with the information for the answers. And important on these screens or in these slides is the link to a lot of the resources where we receive the answers. So don't hesitate at a later time to come back and click on those links and read the information to make yourself as knowledgeable as possible. All right, our first question: how do I know if I'm eligible for protection under the moratorium? So we've got this very lengthy answer, but the new CARES Act moratorium says you must meet 5 specific qualities in order to be, or 5 specific areas in order to be eligible for the moratorium. First and foremost, you must use your best efforts to obtain all government assistance. Okay, now what does that mean? That could mean TANF, the temporary aid to needy families. That could mean food stamps. That could mean additional rent subsidies. It could just anything that you can think of. If you have the opportunity to apply for that, the regulation says you must use, as a tenant, tenants must use best efforts to obtain.
Oh, it looks like we are having some technical difficulties. I'm going to give Angela a second to come back to us. All right.
Chrystie, you want me to pick it up till she rejoins?
Yeah, I'm thinking that she's frozen, so she might be having some technical issues on her side.
Okay, yeah, definitely. And there are multiple things that Angela was just going over as far as what you need to do to qualify for eviction protection. And again, that eviction protection will go through December 31st of 2020, because that has been extended, which is great. So that's very helpful to a lot of renters. So you've got to complete a declaration form. We are going to have a link on our website within the next week to that declaration that has to be filled out by the renter. Anyone on that lease has to fill that declaration out. And again, Angela had covered that you have to make your best efforts, verify that you have made your best efforts to pay the rent, that you can't pay either all of your rent or some of the rent, that you could potentially be homeless. You've also got to meet certain income requirements. So that's very important. So it's not just that you're automatically blanket protected under this moratorium, but you actually have to affirmatively fill out that declaration. So that's very, very important. In addition to that, the South Carolina Supreme Court's issued a temporary moratorium as well, but the overarching CDC moratorium protects folks from eviction. Again, I do want to restate, your rent is still going to be due. So if you get to December 31st, 2020, and you have not paid a dime of rent, when that moratorium does end, you will still be owing that rent and can be evicted at that time. So any amounts of rent that you can pay would be, gratefully helpful to you.
Oh, we've got Angela Childers coming back in. Please hold. There she is.
I'm so sorry. I had no idea what happened. I'm sitting here, I'm talking, I look up, the whole screen is blank. So let's go back real quick. The 5 things that a tenant has to do to qualify for the latest eviction moratorium. Number 1, use best efforts to obtain government assistance. Number 2, as a single adult household, but there can be children, but as earn less than $99,000 per year, or as a 2-adult household, and again, this can include children, less than $198,000 per year. Number 3, they must be unable to pay the full rent due to a substantial loss of income, a layoff, or a loss of hours, a layoff, or extraordinary medical expenses. So you have to be able to demonstrate, you have to be able to certify that you are unable to pay your full rent due to a substantial loss of income, a loss of hours, a layoff, or extraordinary measures. And so we've had a couple calls here in our office, and one of the first things that we'll say is, why didn't you pay your rent? What happened? Did you lose your job? No, I didn't lose my job. Well, why didn't you pay your rent? Well, I paid some other bills. So you have to think about those things as you're trying to qualify under this moratorium. Number 4, you have to use your best efforts to make timely partial payments. So if you are still bringing in some money, you have to show that you are trying and that you are making at least partial payments. And number 5, the eviction would render you homeless or having to live in close quarters with another family. So those are the 5 areas that you must qualify for in order to utilize the protections under this moratorium. As Ann said earlier, there's also a declaration that will have to be signed, and I believe we're going to have a link to that declaration on the website so that you can certify that you meet these 5 areas, and then you would turn that into the landlord. Additionally, something I wanted to bring up, as a landlord, there are pretty severe financial penalties for landlords who do not follow this eviction moratorium. So if you do file as a landlord, if you do file for an eviction on a tenant for non-payment of rent, and the tenant does qualify and has a declaration for these 5 areas under the moratorium, you could be subject to severe financial penalties. So, and all of that is in the regulation that we will have a link to. All right, next slide. I've never been in an eviction situation. What should I do if I cannot pay rent? And the first thing is seek assistance, government assistance, seek assistance through Chrystie. Chrystie's going to talk a lot about that later. She's going to provide you some resources and some information. But one of the things that you really need to do is seek assistance. The next thing you do is talk to your landlord, have a conversation. Say, you know, maybe I can't pay the full rent, but I can pay half the rent this time, or I can pay a little bit more next month. So have conversations with your landlord, communicate with them, but more importantly, document your communication. And if that means sending an email, great. And it can even be sending an email saying, per our conversation yesterday, you agreed that I would pay half my rent on the 15th and the other half on the 25th, whatever it is. But it's always best to document your conversations and to keep that documentation. You know, just I've seen some things in court that are so interesting, and I'm sure no one on this webinar would do this, but I've been in court cases where people were talking and I'm like, wow, did that happen? Because some people just aren't as honest in court as they are in real life. So you need to keep your documentation. All right, next slide, please. What is the process for an eviction? And I know Anne went over this, and she's given you great links to the South Carolina Landlord and Tenant Law. So I'm just gonna reiterate some of it. Remember, we had the 5 areas that you can be evicted for, but you have to have notice. All right, in rent, for failure to pay rent, it's a 5-day notice, but you have to be careful. Some people have that written into their lease. And for all others, it's a 14-day notice. Some people call it a 14-day notice to cure. Some people call it a 14-day notice of right to cure. But for all other lease violations, it's a 14-day notice. So you, as a landlord and a tenant, if you are in violation of your lease, the first thing that you have to do, unless it's failure to pay rent, is get a notice. And lots of times, even with failure to pay rent, you should get a notice. But if it's in your lease, you do not need to receive a notice. Next slide. This slide continues. So next slide. Again, it's continuing after the 14-day notice has expired, or the 5-day notice in the case of rent. The landlord can then file an eviction case in magistrate court. An important thing to remember if you're in court for non-payment of rent is that if your landlord takes a partial payment, and sometimes they'll take a partial payment, it doesn't mean that stops the eviction process. So if you owe your landlord $600 and you walk in there with $100 and they take it, you might think, oh, well, this is going to stop the eviction. They're going to give me more time. That is, in fact, not the case. And the landlord can still follow through with the eviction process. Additionally, when you're in court, you can explain your case to the judge. If you're in there for lease violations and you feel that this is just someone picking on you, or it isn't really an actual accounting of the events, you can certainly explain that to the judge. My advice to you, and this is probably one of the best things that I can say today is read your lease. Read it from front to back. Know what you are signing and then make an informed decision. I remember when my daughter went to college and she moved out into her first apartment, her lease was probably 14 pages. And I said, she says, well, here, are you going to read this? I said, no, ma'am, you are going to read that. And she did. She wasn't happy about it, but she did. So as a tenant, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to read your lease. All right, the next page, next slide. Should I get legal help? Which cases should consider reaching out? And the answer is yes. If you have been served with an eviction notice, or even hopefully before that, if you think you're going to be evicted, to protect yourself and your family, it is a really good idea to seek legal advice. Not only should you seek legal advice, but you should follow the advice of your attorney. And not just seeking legal advice is a good thing, but following the advice of your attorney is also very important. Next slide. Does the landlord's mortgage affect whether renters can be evicted? And if so, how can I get that information? Yes, it does. The landlord's mortgage does have an effect on whether or not you can be evicted through this CARES Act. So how can you find out if or what kind of a mortgage your landlord has? Well, that's not as easy as you might think. One thing that you can try is to look it up on the county website. It may or may not tell you if the property has a mortgage, and if it does have a mortgage, who holds the mortgage. And as a last resort, if you do end up going to court, you can ask the judge to ask the landlord to provide that information. And that would be, I know that it can be hard to find out if your landlord has a mortgage and if that mortgage falls under the CARES Act, but a judge can certainly ask that landlord for that information. Okay, next slide. Are the courts open for business? If yes, how long does the process take? And actually, I think Anne just received some news on this. Anne?
So the courts are open for business as of September 21st. For most matters, they should be fully open. So for example, when we're speaking of renters, if you get some type of notice, you will need to notify the court that you want a hearing. If you get an eviction notice, same thing, of course, you're going to have those same legal deadlines. If you get served with a complaint for foreclosure, you're still going to need to respond to that. But my understanding from the Supreme Court notice is that September 21st is the day when majority of the courts will be back open.
Okay, thank you very much. So yes, as of September 21st, the courts are planned to be opened. And as you can see, as mentioned on the slide, that's what it was, or that's how the courts were opened until that time. All right, next slide. There's a pandemic. Do I still have to show up in court if my landlord files an eviction? And I'm gonna, you can certainly read what it says. It says it depends, but I always say yes. I always tell people, if you've been served with a notice to go to court, you need to go to court. Don't get evicted because you thought you didn't have to go to court, or because someone's in the landlord's office told you they were going to drop the case, or you didn't have to show up. If you get a notice to go to court, I suggest that you go to court just to make sure nothing shows up later. All right, next slide. Do I owe the rent payments if I missed during the moratorium? Yes, you will owe all monies due. If you need help, seek assistance. Chrystie can certainly help you with that, and I know she's going to provide some information later. However,
I am.
Oh, good. All monies that are made due during the moratorium will be due and payable. Okay, next question. Does the eviction moratorium prevent my landlord from charging late fees if I haven't paid my rent in full. And so late fees could have been charged January through March. So remember, January, February, March, before the eviction moratorium took place, and then starting again in August. So no late fees can be charged for April through July, but starting again in August, and of course the first 3 months of the year, we can charge late fees. Okay, next slide. If I was behind on my rent before March 25th, does the eviction moratorium apply to me? And it could. Yes, maybe. And that's the answer. But let's be real. If you haven't paid rent since February, there's a problem. Even the new moratorium says that you will make your best efforts to pay rent. So yes, you may still have protections under the moratorium, but you're going to need a good explanation, especially if your landlord does take you to court, as to why you haven't paid rent since February of 2020. Okay, so you may still have protections, but you need to think about that when you're going to court. Next slide, please. And the next slides. What happens if my lease ends while the moratorium is in place? Can they penalize me by using my rental history as a reason not to renew? What if I don't have a current or written lease? If your lease ended during the first moratorium and you wanted to stay in place, you certainly had that option to do that. The new CARES Act moratorium does not give you those protections. You could go to court and appeal and follow the judge's decision. However, there is no protection now if your lease expires. All right, next slide. Who do I contact for more information about the eviction protections? And again, Lowcountry Legal Volunteers, that's Ann's organization. They do an amazing job. South Carolina Legal Services, South Carolina Pro Bono and SC Lawyer Referral Services, and SC Van. All right, next.
If I could just interject, I just realized that the phone numbers for these organizations are not on the slide. So before I post the presentation onto our website, I will make sure that I update this with their contact information so that participants can reach out to them.
Oh, thank you, Chrystie. That's a great idea.
That's great.
Next question, will there be more federal help for renters? And the answer is maybe. How's that for a definitive answer? There may be additional assistance coming. I'm not aware of any at this time, and I don't know if anybody else is. You can look for it, but don't count on it. This continues on the next slide, so let's go to the next slide as well. It does say that the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of HUD, they are looking for additional monies, but apparently they're not sure where to find it. So at this point, we still don't know if additional monies will be available. All right, next. Maintenance issues. My landlord is changing filters monthly. Do I have to let them in during this pandemic? And it depends. Normally the landlord needs to access the unit to maintain the unit. In this example, if the tenant is able to do so, an agreement may be reached for the tenant to change the filters due to the pandemic. And again, communication with your landlord is key. If you say, hey, you know, can you just leave the filter on the front porch and we'll get it and put it in, most of your landlords are going to be very reasonable and say, yes, that's certainly, and we appreciate you doing that. Following that, my household is under quarantine. Do I have to let maintenance inside to do work? It depends. Again, normally the landlord has the right by statute to come in, but I think most landlords during the pandemic, during the first couple months of the pandemic were only going in for emergency issues, like if the unit was on, there was water on the floor, the unit was flooding. So I think most landlords are moving forward with that now and actually doing work inside units. But again, if you want, you need to tell your landlord you're under quarantine and that they can't come in, or you don't want them to come in, and I'm sure most would comply. They don't want their maintenance men ill and out from work, so I believe that they would certainly take that into consideration, and most would thank you for letting them know. All right, Chrystie? My landlord is not making repairs. How long should I wait before contacting someone to help me? Like I just said, some landlords were only doing emergencies, but most of that has ended. So communication with management is the best way to find out what is your landlord's policy right now. And then if you still don't get satisfaction, you could certainly put it in writing and submit it to the landlord. And then you can contact legal services and Ann's organization to see if they can help you move forward with that information. But again, you want some documentation as you move forward so that you can say, yes, I told them and they didn't respond, or yes, I told them and they did respond. All right, next question. We're going to move to landlord, some landlord questions. Does the moratorium protect against evictions due to foreclosure? And again, no, the moratorium is intended to protect tenants, not landlords, from evictions due to foreclosure. All right, and the CARES Act included a 120-day federal eviction moratorium for renters, but not for landlords. Okay, next question. As a landlord, how do I know if I'm eligible for protection under the moratorium? As an eviction moratorium on most federally backed rental housing ended on July 24th. However, there are some landlords that can apply for a line of credit or a small business administration disaster loan. And that's important. And the source, the link to the source is right below that information. If you are a landlord and you are in need of funds because you have had tenants that aren't paying rent, then you certainly need to apply, if possible, for that small business administration loan or the disaster line of credit, the disaster loan, whatever it might be. And did you want to add, did you tell me earlier that this has been extended through December 31st?
So basically the CDC, my understanding, Angela, is it's the renter protections have been extended through December 31st. I'm unclear as to the additional landlord protections.
Okay, yes, that is my understanding of it as well. Okay, but landlords, you know, go ahead and watch. You never know when stuff is going to come.
Right.
That's right. Okay, next question. And again, who do I contact for more information about the eviction protection? Same organizations, excellent organizations. And as a landlord, if you have a legal question, these are resources that you don't want to pass up. Next slide, please. Are there financial assistance programs for landlords who suffer a loss of income as a result of a tenant's inability to pay rent? And yes, landlords should check to see if they qualify for temporary rental relief from many affected by the coronavirus. And that link on the slide is an excellent link. Please don't hesitate to check. If you're a landlord and you're suffering a loss, check that information to see if you qualify. Next slide. Who can I reach out to for direct financial assistance to pay my mortgage? And landlords can receive forbearance or relief on their federally backed mortgages. And the link is right there. I suggest if you are in that situation as a landlord, then you certainly need to click that link and get detailed information. And another excellent option would be to contact your mortgage holder and ask them what you may qualify for. And as far as I know, the extension for the forbearance extension is available, and they give you some time to pay it back. So they may, a possible solution would be to forego a couple payments, and then they'll give you up to 24 months. You may qualify for up to 24 months in a repayment schedule. So really a good program if you're a landlord having problems making your rental or making your mortgage payments. All right, next slide. Will there be more federal help for landlords? And the resounding answer is, again, maybe. So again, the government is still looking for that money. And if they find it, they'll certainly make it available. Try to keep yourself informed. I know there's a lot of information out there, but check reputable sites, check the United Way site so that you can follow the links that we're putting on or that as part of this presentation. Those are reputable sites with reputable information. We, at the end of the last moratorium on July 24th, we had no clue. We knew there was talk of a new moratorium. We had no clue where it would come from or what it would look like. And September 4th, we received a new moratorium. So as a landlord, if you're looking for more help, it's very important to keep yourself informed and keep checking the links so that you can find out what's available. And this slide continues. Again, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, that would be Dr. Ben Carson, he will take action as appropriate, and you can find the link. Next. Okay, last question. My lease says I have a right to peaceful enjoyment, but there are some in my community who are disturbing the peace and not practicing social distancing guidelines. Can my landlord evict them even though we are in a pandemic? The answer, if the incident is properly documented by the landlord and the landlord sends the 14-day notice that we discussed earlier, they can file for an eviction and explain the case to the judge. Then as a tenant, the tenant would have the option to explain their side as well. The judge would make a decision and they would both follow the judge's orders. So if your lease says you have the right to peaceful enjoyment, can your landlord evict them? Another option would be to, if you wanted to speak specifically about your case, to call Lowcountry Legal Volunteers and see what they have to say about it. You have some very brilliant minds at Lowcountry Legal Volunteers. All right. Thank you, Chrystie. I think we've finished the questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Angela. And I just want to remind the participants that those are questions that the three of us have received throughout this period of uncertainty when it comes to the housing stability in our community. So now we're going to do the next polling question, which is, are you currently facing or worried you will be facing eviction or foreclosure due to COVID? We have 64% of the votes in right now. And we have a resounding no. 93% of our participants are saying that they are not worried or currently facing eviction. And that could be because a lot of the participants are here to gather a bunch of information for their clients to distribute. So with that, we're going to move on from the polling question and start the section on the direct financial assistance. I know that we've heard about the process for evictions and foreclosures. We've heard the laws in reference to those processes, and we just heard some of the most frequently asked questions the panel has had posed to them. So now, let's try to reduce some of that worry by providing where we might be able to obtain that help. So let's start with the most wide-reaching programs first, and those are the federal programs. So if you follow the links that are provided on each of these slides, it's going to take you to those to the resources that we're discussing now. And for direct financial assistance to pay your rent, you can reach out to the United States Disaster Financial Assistance and see if you qualify for COVID relief. Here's a snapshot of their page, and you see a variety of information on this page. You have health eviction ban, you have food programs, you have coronavirus stimulus check information, and then temporary mortgage relief due to the coronavirus pandemic. So these are some of the federal programs that are out there to help. Also, you can check to see government programs to help pay for home energy bills and other expenses. And those are going to be found at this address. And then here's the information that you're going to find there. So you're going to get help with some home energy bills, help with prescription drug costs, help paying for telephone service, help with medical bills. And then this is the link to that. We've referred to TANF several times throughout this presentation. And TANF, once again, stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And then the Family Independence Program. So here are direct links to those federal programs to see if you're eligible or can receive that assistance. All right, so the next program that we're going to talk about, you can also check to see if you qualify for federal programs. And we're drilling down a little bit further into the federal/state programs now. And the link that I provided on this slide is going to take you to the assistance programs administered by the Department of Social Services. Those programs are the ones I just mentioned, such as Family Independence, TANF, or the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. And you can access all of these programs right on the website that's provided. All right, so now we are on United Way's COVID Relief Fund. We do have a fund currently available for individuals who have received, who have been impacted by directly by loss of income or loss of employment. Just some helpful hints when trying to obtain assistance. Know that repeated calls only slow down the process. We are all trying our hardest to return calls as quickly as possible. Make sure to leave a working phone number for us to call you back at. A lot of times we'll go to call back and the number is out of service and we can't reach you. Another thing is to make sure that your voicemail box has been set up so that we can leave a voicemail message. And also make sure that there's room on the voicemail for us to leave that message so that we can get back to you. We are experiencing a heavy call volume, but we will get back to every caller that calls in for that assistance. Next thing is the SC Thrive Rental Assistance Program. They are able to provide up to $1,500 towards rent made payable directly to the landlord. This application process is mainly an online process, but there is a paper application that can be printed, completed, and mailed. It's important to note that those living in subsidized housing or those receiving housing subsidies, such as Section 8, are not eligible for this assistance because your rental amount is adjusted according to your income. So if you are receiving subsidies, make sure that if your income has been affected, that you are letting your landlord know that it has been affected. All right, and now we're going to drill down a little bit more and provide some local organizations that can provide assistance, beginning with Salvation Army, because it has the largest footprint. They do cover Beaufort, Jasper, Hampton, and Colleton counties, and listed as all of their contact information along with the services that they can provide. Next, we move on to the EOC office. As most people know, the EOC office, which is actually the Equal Opportunities Commission. And this program has income guidelines, and individuals must be considered low income according to the federal poverty guidelines. But if that criteria meets your family's dynamic, then please reach out to the EOC office at either the Beaufort number or the Jasper number. And that is for utility assistance. And then now that we're going to dive even deeper and discuss the programs that tend to be more geographically specific. So Agape Family Life Center provides services predominantly to Jasper County residents. They have a wonderful food pantry on premise. They provide limited financial assistance, and they have established a learning pod for children of working parents so that their children will be able to learn virtually while they're at work. All right, next we have Antioch Education Center, who also serves Jasper residents. They have assisted Jasper residents with food and direct assistance to help those families through crisis. They will be assisting online and by telephone only. They ask that you please call them or fill out the application online and not come into the office. And then for Bluffton residents, there is a wonderful organization called Bluffton Self-Help. They are currently accepting applications for emergency financial assistance online, or you can go to their physical location and pick up a paper application that can be picked up at the office and returned into a secure box that they have established there. But direct assistance isn't all that can be obtained through Bluffton Self-Help. They have a food pantry on premise, and they also have their technology center open to the public for those that need access to a computer to apply for all these great resources that we're talking about. And I believe that they are the only computer lab open right now that is open to the public. So if that is something that you need, please, by all means, take advantage of that technology center. And for Hilton Head Island residents, there's Deep Well. They're asking those that are not technologically savvy to call them, and they will conduct a telephone interview. If you are technologically savvy, there is an online process that can be used. And they also have a food pantry program to assist those residents with food insecurity issues. All right, so for Northern Beaufort County residents, Help of Beaufort is providing direct assistance, and they also have a food pantry on premise. Now for the direct assistance, there is an online form that should be used. If you are one of those that is not technologically savvy, I am sure if you reached out and called the phone number that they would be able to walk you through that process. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the legal resources that are available out there. I would be remiss if I didn't provide top billing to Lowcountry Legal Volunteers since they are co-hosts of this presentation. But more than that, they are a local organization attuned to the legal needs of the Lowcountry. And if you still have legal questions after this presentation, give them a call. I heard from Ann that she has gotten a bunch of help together, and they have people, lawyers standing by ready to provide that pro bono assistance to you guys. All right. And because Ann and Lowcountry Legal Volunteers can't possibly do all of this alone, there's also the South Carolina Legal Services that can provide legal assistance. They have created a special intake line specifically for individuals and families across South Carolina facing civil legal problems as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The hotline can assist with legal questions about evictions and all housing matters. So if that is you, please take advantage of that. And make sure that you leave a message with the best time that they, to receive a call back so that they can get in touch with you. And the final group of resources that we'll be discussing is housing. And Angela did such a great job in providing the Q&A portion of this presentation. And her organization does a wonderful job in providing affordable housing to low and moderate income families. However, the Housing Authority also has some other great resources on their website, even if you don't fit within those income brackets. On their website, they have a rental property interactive map for affordable housing locations, directions, and details on the various housing options available in the county. So if you are looking for new housing, that would be a great place to start, is on that interactive map that's located on the Beaufort Housing Authority website that's listed on this slide. Some additional housing resources are Lowcountry Council of Governments, which provides services to eligible seniors and disabled individuals. They have the following programs. They have long-term care residence advocacy, family caregiver support programs, legal assistance, information and referral assistance services, insurance counseling, and they also have home and community-based services. Remember, this is for individuals, eligible seniors and disabled individuals. And then schousingsearch.com is another housing resource. South Carolina State Housing Finance and Development Authority funded this service to help you make more informed funding decisions about housing options in South Carolina. And since they are a government agency, their goal is really to connect you with housing resources to enable you to make an informed decision when selecting your next house. And all of that information can be found right here at this website. And here's all the services that they provide. All right, so now that I have went through all of the resources that are available to individuals, this is time for the question and answer portion of the webinar. Now remember to click the chat icon right down here and type in your question into the box and hit enter. And then we will be able to see your questions. Amber is going to start asking those questions that we've received already. And please just remember that questions we are unable to answer due to time constraints will be added to the FAQ document and posted on the United Way website. So we will get all of the questions answered, just maybe not right here, right now. Okay, and with that, I am going to hand the floor to Amber.
So right now, so far, we only have one question.
Okay.
Now there's a couple more coming in.
Okay.
The first question is the CDC moratorium only good for federally funded housing?
All right, Angela, who would like to field that question?
Okay, so it's for tenants. The current moratorium is primarily a tenant moratorium, and it is available for tenants who meet those 5 conditions. And I hope that answers the question.
Okay.
So maybe if it didn't answer the question, they can write back in.
And the next question is great info today. How will we get access to the slides once available?
And I think those are going to be put on the United Way website, is my understanding. And we're also going to put it on the Lowcountry Legal Volunteers website as well.
That's accurate. Chrystie just fell off the call. She had a technical glitch, but we will be posting this stuff online and sharing with Lowcountry Legal Volunteers as soon as possible.
And the next question, I missed the first 10 minutes of the webinar. How can I watch it?
Thomas, if you go to our website and you find the link, which should be posted within 24 hours, you'll be able to watch the entire thing over.
And so far, that's all the questions that have posted.
So if anybody has any other questions, if you could go ahead and submit those real quick. In the meantime, we have one final poll for everybody, and I'm launching that right now. Fantastic answers are starting to come in. Looks like a lot of people seem to have gotten something out of this, which I would guess because everybody stuck with us through this. There's a lot of information, and I'm so grateful for Ann and Angela.
And we thank you. I mean, I think this was a much needed service to the community. So thank you for hosting it and putting it together, and Ann, for all your knowledge.
Same to you, Angela. Yeah, this has been very enjoyable, and I'm glad we could partner up with United Way and the Beaufort Housing Authority to provide this to folks.
Absolutely.
So just in case anybody was interested, everybody that responded said that they did get their questions answered in the presentation, and that they do feel like they have a better knowledge about this topic before the presentation. I know that I do. And I want to thank everybody for being a part of this presentation. As with any Zoom call, we had a couple of tiny glitches, but in general, I think it went fantastic. Chrystie did a great job. So a virtual clap for her. Good job, Chrystie. And with that, I thank you all. And I'm going to, wait, we got one more question. Yep. That came in. Amber, do you want to?
Yes. If I'm looking to move into a new home at this time, I'm on furlough.
Thomas, you might want to reword that. We're not clear what the question is. We'll give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, so if anybody has any legal questions, please feel free to reach out to Ann at Lowcountry Legal Volunteers to follow up. Thomas, I'm sorry that question was not clear, but in the interest of everybody's time, we're going to go ahead and close the meeting out. Again, thank you to everyone for attending. We sure do appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.